The box arrived on a Tuesday, unannounced, like a ghost slipping through the mail slot. Eli's hands trembled as he read the return address, his dead husband's parents, who hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. He tore it open, and there it was, a dress, soft and pale, with a name stitched inside that stopped his heart. Eli sank onto the couch, the fabric slipping through his fingers like water. The name, Amelia, was embroidered in delicate cursive on the inner lining, a name he'd never heard Caleb mention in their 6 years together. His mind raced. Amelia. Who was she? A sister? A secret? The weight of Caleb's absence, already a constant ache, twisted into something sharper, more urgent. 3 years after the car accident that stole his husband, Eli thought he'd buried the worst of his questions. But this dress, this name, was a key to a door he didn't know existed. The living room in their small Ohio home felt smaller tonight, the walls pressing in with memories of Caleb's laughter, his gentle touch, their quiet nights planning a future that never came. Eli and Caleb had met in college. 2 boys from different worlds. Eli, the shy artist from a broken home, and Caleb, the golden boy with a preacher's smile and a heart too big for his conservative roots. They'd built a life in this house, against the odds, against Caleb's parents, who called their love a sin until the day Caleb died. Now, this gift from them, this dress, felt like a message from beyond the grave. Eli traced the stitching again, his fingers lingering on the A. Why would they send this? Caleb's parents, Martha and Paul, had cut contact after the funeral, their silence a louder rejection than their words ever were. They'd never accepted Eli, never acknowledged the marriage. Yet here was this package, addressed to him in Martha's careful handwriting. The dress was beautiful, vintage, with a soft cream hue and lace that whispered of another era. It wasn't just a dress, it was a story, and Eli needed to know whose. He set it down and reached for the wooden box it came in. Inside, beneath tissue paper, was a folded note. His breath hitched as he opened it. For Eli, it read, "Because Caleb would have wanted you to know." No signature, just those words, cryptic and heavy. Know what? The note felt like a challenge, a dare to unravel something Caleb had kept hidden. Eli's chest tightened with a mix of betrayal and longing. He'd thought he knew everything about Caleb, every scar, every dream, every fear. But Amelia, she was a shadow in their story, and Eli couldn't look away. The next morning, Eli drove to the local library, the dress carefully folded in the passenger seat. He didn't know where to start, but the library was neutral ground, a place where questions could breathe. The librarian, Ms. Carter, a kind woman with gray curls and a knack for remembering everyone's story, noticed his unease. "Eli, you look like you're carrying the world," she said, sliding a coffee across the counter. He managed a weak smile and showed her the dress, explaining the box, the name, the note. Her eyes softened, but she had no answers. Only a suggestion: start with the town records. If Amelia was connected to Caleb's family, she might be in there. Eli spent hours in the library's basement, poring over microfiche and dusty ledgers. Caleb's family, the Warrens, had deep roots in this town, their name tied to the church and the old textile mill that closed in the 80s. But no Amelia Warren appeared in the records, no sister, no cousin, no trace. Eli's frustration grew, but so did his determination. He couldn't let this go. The dress wasn't just fabric. It was a piece of Caleb, a piece Eli had never touched. By evening, he was back home, The dress spread across the dining table like a map. He called his best friend, Jamie, a trans woman who'd known Caleb since high school. Jamie arrived with takeout and a bottle of wine. Her presence a balm to Eli's fraying nerves. "Okay, let's think," she said, examining the dress. "This is old. Maybe 1960s. And the name Ameliate's not random. Caleb's parents don't strike me as the type to send cryptic gifts without a reason." She paused, her eyes meeting Eli's. What if Amelia was someone they lost? Someone they don't talk about? Eli's heart sank. Jamie's words made sense, but they opened a wound. Caleb had been open about his life, or so Eli thought. They'd shared everything late-night talks about: their fears, their dreams of adopting a child, their plans to leave Ohio for somewhere more accepting. Could Caleb have hidden something this big? Eli didn't want to believe it, but the dress was proof something had been left unsaid. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He lay in their bed, the dress draped over a chair in the corner, its silhouette haunting in the moonlight. He thought of Caleb's smile, the way he'd hum while cooking, the way he'd fought for their love despite his family's disapproval. Eli had always admired Caleb's courage, but now he wondered if that courage hid something deeper, something unspoken. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the life they'd built together. The next day, Eli made a decision. He'd go to Caleb's parents. He hadn't seen them since the funeral, hadn't wanted to face their coldness again, but the dress demanded it. He packed it carefully, the note tucked inside, and drove the hour to their farmhouse on the edge of town. The drive was quiet, the Ohio fields stretching endlessly under a gray sky. Eli's hands gripped the wheel, his mind replaying every moment with Caleb, searching for clues he'd missed. By the time he pulled into their gravel driveway, his heart was pounding. Martha answered the door, her face pale and lined with grief that hadn't faded in 3 years. "Eli," she said, her voice soft but guarded. "Why are you here?" He held up the box, the dress inside, and watched her eyes widen. "You sent this," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I need to know why. Who is Amelia?" Martha's hands froze on the doorframe, her knuckles whitening. "Come inside," she said finally, stepping back to let Eli in. The farmhouse smelled of old wood and lavender, a scent that hit Eli like a memory of Caleb's childhood stories. He followed her to the kitchen, where Paul sat at the table, his Bible open but unread. The dress, still in its box, felt like a third presence in the room. Eli set the box down, his voice low but firm. "You sent this to me." The note said Caleb wanted me to know. "Know what?" "Who's Amelia?" Paul's eyes flicked to the box, then away, his jaw tight. Martha sat, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths, until Martha spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Amelia was someone we loved, someone we lost." Eli's stomach twisted. "A sister? A cousin?" He pressed, but Martha shook her head. "Not exactly." Her vagueness frustrated him, but her eyes brimmed. Hunt had told him this wasn't cruelty. It was pain. Paul cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We sent the dress because it's time. Caleb would have wanted you to understand who he was. All of him." The words landed like a punch. All of him. Eli thought he'd known every piece of Caleb, the way he'd fidget when nervous, the stories of his youth, the quiet strength that held them together. But this was a crack in the foundation of their life. He leaned forward, his voice shaking. If Caleb had a secret, I deserved to know. I was his husband. Martha's eyes met his, and for the first time, Eli saw something like regret. You were, she said softly. And he loved you. More than we ever understood. She stood, motioning for him to follow. They climbed the creaking stairs to a small attic room, its door locked for years, judging by the dust. Inside, boxes were stacked high, filled with photos, letters, and closed relics of a life Eli didn't recognize. Martha pulled out a photo album, its pages yellowed but carefully preserved. She opened it to a picture of a young person, maybe 16, with Caleb's eyes but softer features, wearing a dress not unlike the one in the box. This is Amelia, Martha said, her voice breaking. This is who Caleb was before he was Caleb. Eli's breath caught. The room spun as the truth settled in. Caleb had been trans. Amelia was Caleb's past, a name he'd left behind. Eli stared at the photo, his mind reeling. Caleb had never told him. Not in their late-night talks. Not in their vows. Not in the quiet moments when they bared their souls. Why? He wanted to be angry, but all he felt was a hollow ache. Why didn't he tell me? He asked, his voice raw. Martha's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to, but he was afraid. Afraid you'd see him differently. Afraid of losing you. Paul spoke up, his voice softer now. We didn't understand him back then. We pushed him to be someone he wasn't. When he became Caleb, we lost Amelia, and we didn't know how to love him after that. Not until it was too late. Eli's chest tightened. He saw the guilt in their faces, the weight of years spent rejecting their child. The dress wasn't just a gift, it was an apology, a bridge they were trying to build too late. Eli left the farmhouse with more questions than answers. He drove home in a daze, the dress beside him, the photo of Amelia tucked into his pocket. Back in his living room, he sat with the album Martha had given him, flipping through pictures of a young Amelia smiling. Awkward. Alive. Each photo was a piece of Caleb he'd never known. A piece that made his husband both stranger and more familiar. He traced the lines of Amelia's face, seeing Caleb's determination, his kindness, his fire. He called Jamie again, needing her perspective. She listened as he poured out the story, her silence thoughtful. Caleb didn't tell you because he was protecting himself, she said finally. Being trans in a town like this, with parents like that, it's a war you fight every day. He probably wanted to tell you, Eli, but fear is a powerful thing. Her words stung, but they rang true. Eli had always known Caleb carried scars, she just hadn't known their shape. Over the next few days, Eli dove into Caleb's past, piecing together the life of Amelia. He found old yearbooks at the library, where Amelia Warren was listed as a quiet student with a talent for music. He tracked down Caleb's high school music teacher, Mrs. Larson, who remembered Amelia as a gifted violinist who stopped playing after junior year. She changed, Mrs. Larson said, her voice tinged with sadness. She became Caleb, and the music stopped. I think it was too painful for him to keep going. Eli's heart broke at the thought of Caleb abandoning something he loved. He remembered Caleb humming softly in their kitchen, never picking up an instrument, never mentioning his past. Had he been hiding from himself as much as from Eli? The thought was unbearable, but it fueled Eli's need to understand. He started visiting places from Caleb's youth, the church where he'd been baptized as Amelia, the park where he'd played as a child, the mill where his father had worked. Each place added a layer to the story, a piece of the person Caleb had been. One evening, Eli found an old cassette tape in the attic album, labeled Amelia's Recital, 2008. He dug out an ancient tape player and pressed play. The sound of a violin filled the room, hesitant at first, then soaring, full of longing and defiance. It was Caleb Amelia playing with a passion Eli had never heard. Tears streamed down his face as the music washed over him, a window into a part of his husband he'd never known. He listened until the tape clicked off, then played it again, letting the notes stitch together the pieces of his broken heart. The violin's final note lingered in Eli's mind for days, a haunting reminder of the life Caleb had lived before him. He couldn't shake the image of Amelia, a girl with dreams too big for her small town, forced to bury them to become the man Eli had loved. The dress, the tape, the photos, they were fragments of a truth Caleb had carried alone, and Eli felt both closer to him and further away than ever. He started writing letters to Caleb, a habit he'd picked up after the accident to cope with the grief. But now, the letters were different. "Why didn't you trust me?" he wrote, his pen shaking. "I loved you, every part of you. I would have loved Amelia, too." The words poured out, raw and unfiltered, as he grappled with the betrayal and the love that still burned inside him. He didn't mail them. Of course they were for him. For Caleb. For the space between them that death couldn't fill. Eli's search for answers led him to the church, a looming brick building where Caleb's parents still attended every Sunday. He hadn't been inside since the funeral, when Martha and Paul's cold stares had made it clear he wasn't welcome. But now, he needed to know more about Amelia's life there. He slipped in during a weekday, when the pews were empty, and found Pastor John, an older man with kind eyes who'd known Caleb as a child. Amelia was a light, Pastor John said, sitting with Eli in the quiet sanctuary. She sang in the choir, played at every service. But she was different. The other kids sensed it, and so did the congregation. When she started questioning who she was, this place wasn't kind. Eli's jaw tightened. He could imagine Caleb Amelia standing in these pews, feeling the weight of judgment. When did she become Caleb? Eli asked. The pastor sighed. Around 17. He left for college and never came back. Not as Amelia. Anyway. The story unfolded slowly, each detail a knife. Amelia had been bullied, not just by kids, but by adults who whispered about sin and salvation. Her parents, devout and rigid, had sent her to conversion therapy, a secret they'd kept even from Caleb's siblings. Eli's stomach churned. He knew Caleb had struggled with his family. But this was a betrayal deeper than he'd imagined. Pastor John looked at him with sorrow. Caleb forgave them. You know, he told me once, after he met you, said you gave him the strength to let go of the past. Eli drove home in silence, the weight of Caleb's forgiveness heavier than his own anger. He wanted to hate Martha and Paul, but he saw their pain, now their regret, their loss. They'd sent the dress not to hurt him, but to make amends, to give him a piece of Caleb they'd failed to love. It didn't erase their mistakes, but it complicated his grief, weaving threads of compassion into his hurt. Back home, Eli pulled out the dress again, spreading it across the couch. He imagined Caleb wearing it, maybe in secret, maybe just once, before he'd chosen to live as his true self. The thought was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Eli wanted to honor that truth, to understand it fully. He called Jamie, who came over with her girlfriend, Lena, a non-binary photographer with a knack for seeing people's souls. You need to tell his story, Lena said, studying the dress. Not just for you, but for everyone who loved him, and for those who didn't. The idea sparked something in Eli. He was an artist. After all, his paintings had always been his way of processing the world. What if he could create something for Caleb? For Amelia? For the love they'd shared? He started sketching. Late into the night. Images of a young Amelia playing the violin. Of Caleb laughing in their kitchen. Of the dress as a bridge between their lives. The sketches were raw. Imperfect. But they felt alive. Like Caleb was guiding his hand. Eli's days became a blur of research and creation. He tracked down Caleb's old friends from college, hoping to find more pieces of his past. 1. A woman named Sarah had known Caleb when he first transitioned. He was so scared at first. She told Eli over coffee in a Columbus cafe. But when he started living as Caleb, it was like he came alive. You made him even brighter. Eli. He told me you were his home. Her words were a gift, but they also deepened the mystery. If Eli was his home, why hadn't Caleb shared Amelia with him? Sarah gave him a lead, a storage unit Caleb had kept in the city. One Eli hadn't known about. With a mix of dread and hope, Eli drove there the next day, key in hand from Sarah's spare. The unit was small, cluttered with boxes of books, clothes, and sheet music. One box held a journal, its pages filled with Caleb's handwriting. Eli's heart raced as he opened it, the words pulling him into Caleb's mind. The journal was from his college years, when Amelia became Caleb. I'm scared. One entry read, scared of losing who I was, scared of who I'll become. But I can't keep pretending. Amelia is me, but she's not all of me. Another entry, dated a year later, mentioned Eli. I met someone today. He sees me, really sees me. I want to tell him everything. But what if he doesn't understand? What if he stops looking at me like I'm his world? Eli's tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink. Caleb had wanted to tell him. He'd just run out of time. Eli took the journal home, reading it cover to cover. It was a map of Caleb's heart, his fears, his triumphs. Amelia hadn't been a secret to hide, been a part of him he'd struggled to share. Not out of shame, but out of love. Eli felt the weight of that love now, heavier and more beautiful than ever. He knew what he had to do, tell Caleb's story, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever felt unseen. Eli's studio became a sanctuary, the walls lined with sketches of Caleb and Amelia, their lives intertwined in charcoal and paint. He worked late into the night, the dress always nearby, its soft folds a reminder of the story he was telling. Each stroke of his brush felt like a conversation with Caleb, a way to bridge the gap between the man he'd loved and the girl he'd never known. The paintings were bold, raw, capturing Amelia's quiet strength and Caleb's radiant joy. But they also held the pain of a life caught between acceptance and rejection. He decided to create an exhibit, a tribute to Caleb's journey. He called it Amelia's Song, inspired by the violin tape that still played in his dreams. The local gallery, a small space run by a queer artist collective, agreed to host it. Jamie and Lena helped him plan, their enthusiasm a lifeline when doubt crept in. This is bigger than you, Jamie said one night, helping him frame a portrait of Amelia in the dress. It's for every kid in this town who feels like they can't be themselves. Eli reached out to Caleb's parents again, this time with a different purpose. He wanted their blessing, or at least their understanding, for the exhibit. He drove to the farmhouse, the journal tucked in his bag, ready to show them who their child had been. Martha welcomed him inside, her face softer than before. Paul was there too, quieter, his hands folded tightly. "I'm making something for Caleb," Eli said, his voice steady. "For Amelia. To show the world who he was." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "We didn't know how to love her," she admitted. "We thought we were saving her, but we lost him instead." Paul spoke up, his voice rough. "Do what you need to, Eli. Just don't make us out to be monsters." Eli didn't promise that. He couldn't. But he promised to tell the truth. And that seemed to be enough. The weeks leading up to the exhibit were a whirlwind. Eli worked with Lena to photograph the dress, the journal, the cassette tape, weaving them into the display. He wrote captions for each piece, drawing from Caleb's words in the journal. One painting, the centerpiece, showed Caleb and Amelia side by side, their faces blending into one, the dress draped between them. The caption read, "I am both, and I am enough." Eli poured his heart into every detail, hoping Caleb could feel it, wherever he was. The night of the exhibit, the gallery was packed. Friends, strangers, even some of Caleb's old classmates showed up, drawn by word of mouth. Eli stood by the entrance, nervous but resolute, the dress displayed on a mannequin in the center of the room. Jamie squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered. He'd be so proud. Eli wanted to believe her. But the weight of Caleb's absence was heavy tonight. The journal's words echoing in his mind. What if he stops looking at me like I'm his world? People moved through the exhibit, their faces a mix of awe and tears. A young trans teen approached Eli, their eyes wide. "This is my story too," they said, voice trembling. "Thank you." Eli's throat tightened. He hadn't expected this, the way Caleb's life could reach beyond the grave, touching others who'd felt the same fear, the same hope. It was a gift, one he hadn't known he was giving. Martha and Paul arrived late, standing quietly at the back. Eli watched them, his heart a tangle of anger and empathy. They lingered by the centerpiece, Martha's hand brushing the dress's hem. She caught Eli's eye and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they'd all avoided for so long. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. After the exhibit, Eli felt lighter, like he'd set down a burden he'd carried for years. He kept working, turning the exhibit into a traveling show, taking Caleb's story to other towns, other galleries. Each stop brought new stories, people who'd known Caleb, people who'd loved someone like him, people who'd found themselves in his art. Eli started a scholarship in Caleb's name, funding queer youth in the arts, a way to keep his husband's light alive. But there were moments, late at night, when Eli still felt the ache. He'd sit with the dress, the journal, the tape, and talk to Caleb. "I wish you'd told me," he'd whisper. "I would have loved you even more." He didn't know if Caleb could hear him, but he felt him in the music, in the art, in the love that refused to fade. One evening, as Eli packed the dress for the next exhibit, he found a loose thread in the lining. Carefully, he tugged it, revealing a tiny pocket he hadn't noticed before. Inside was a folded piece of paper, Caleb's handwriting unmistakable. "Eli," it read, "if you're reading this, you know about Amelia. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. Not of you, but of losing us. You're my home. Always." Eli's tears fell, soaking the note. It was the closure he'd been chasing, the proof that Caleb had trusted him. even if he hadn't found the words in time. The note changed everything. Eli carried it in his wallet, a talisman against the doubts that still crept in. Caleb had loved him enough to write those words, to hide them in the dress, trusting that one day Eli would find them. It wasn't the full story, but it was enough a tether to the man he'd loved, a reminder that their bond was real, even across the divide of secrets and death. Eli threw himself into the traveling exhibit, each city a new chapter in Caleb's legacy. In Chicago, a queer youth group hosted a panel after the show, where Eli shared Caleb's story, his voice breaking as he read from the journal. In Seattle, a trans elder approached him, tears in her eyes, saying, "I wish I'd had an Eli when I was young." Each interaction healed a piece of him, stitching together the wounds left by Caleb's silence and the world's cruelty. But the road wasn't easy. In some towns, the exhibit faced backlash. Protesters stood outside a gallery in rural Indiana, holding signs that echoed the judgment Caleb had faced as Amelia. Eli stood firm, channeling Caleb's courage. He spoke to the crowd, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of someone who'd lost too much to stay silent. "This is about love," he said, holding up a photo of Caleb. "Love doesn't stop because you don't understand it." Some walked away, but others stayed, listening, their faces softening. Back in Ohio, Eli started visiting Martha and Paul more often. It wasn't easy. Their past was a wall between them, but the dress had opened a door, however small. Martha shared stories of Amelia's childhood, her love for music, her quiet rebellion against their expectations. Paul was quieter, but one day he handed Eli a photo of Amelia at her first recital, her face alight with joy. "We should have fought for her," he said, his voice thick. Eli nodded, unable to speak. He saw their regret, and while it didn't erase the pain, it made room for something new. Eli's art evolved with each exhibit. He started incorporating sound, playing Amelia's violin tape alongside the paintings, letting her music fill the galleries. He added interactive elements, inviting visitors to write their own stories of love and identity, creating a tapestry of voices that echoed Caleb's. The exhibit became a movement, a space where people could be seen, where Caleb's life and Amelia's could inspire change. One night in Portland, a young man approached Eli after a show. His name was Sam, and he was trans, just starting his transition. "Your exhibit saved me," he said, his voice shaky. "I was ready to give up, but seeing Caleb's story, it gave me hope." Eli hugged him, tears in his eyes. He thought of Caleb, of the journal, of the note. This was why he was doing this, not just for himself, but for everyone Caleb could still touch. Eli's own healing was slower. He still had nights where he'd lie awake, missing Caleb's warmth, wrestling with the what-ifs. What if Caleb had told him about Amelia? What if they'd had more time? But the note, the dress, the art, they were answers, in their own way. Caleb had loved him, fully, even if he hadn't shared every piece of himself. And Eli loved him back. All of him, Amelia included. He started therapy, something he'd resisted after Caleb's death. The sessions were hard, peeling back layers of grief and anger. But they helped him see Caleb's silence not as a betrayal, but as a human struggle. He was protecting his heart. His therapist said, "And yours." Eli began to forgive not just Caleb, but himself, for all the questions he hadn't asked, the signs he hadn't seen. One afternoon, Eli visited Caleb's grave, something he hadn't done in months. He brought the dress, laying it gently on the grass. I know now, he said, his voice steady. And I love you more for it. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of spring. And for the first time, Eli felt peace. He wasn't saying goodbye, he was saying, I see you. Back home, Eli started planning the next phase of the exhibit. He wanted to take it international, to reach more people, to keep Caleb's story alive. He reached out to queer organizations, artists, and activists, building a network that felt like a family. Jamie and Lena were by his side, their support unwavering. You're doing what Caleb would have done, Lena said one night, helping him pack paintings. You're making the world a little softer for people like us. Eli smiled, the note in his wallet a quiet reminder of Caleb's love. He didn't have all the answers, but he had enough. The dress, the journal, the music, they were pieces of a life that had changed his. And now they were changing others. Caleb's story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The exhibit's international tour began in Toronto, where a diverse crowd filled the gallery, their faces reflecting the same awe and pain Eli had seen in Ohio. He stood by the centerpiece painting, watching as people lingered over the dress, the journal, the violin tape. A young couple, both non-binary, left a note in the exhibit's guest book. Thank you for showing us we can be whole. Eli read it later, his heart swelling. This was Caleb's legacy, reaching further than either of them had ever dreamed. But the tour wasn't without challenges. In some cities, venues hesitated, wary of controversy. Eli learned to navigate pushback, leaning on the community he'd built, artists, activists, and allies who believed in the story. In London, a trans youth organization partnered with him, hosting workshops alongside the exhibit, turning art into action. Eli spoke at one, sharing Caleb's journal entries, his voice steady but thick with emotion. He was afraid to tell me, he admitted. But his love was bigger than his fear. That's what I want you to take away, love wins, even when it's messy. Backstage, he met a curator named Aisha, a trans woman with a sharp mind and a warm smile. She'd lost her partner too, and they bonded over shared grief, swapping stories of love and loss. You're not just telling Caleb's story, Aisha said, her eyes bright. You're telling ours. She invited him to bring the exhibit to her hometown in South Africa, a challenge Eli hadn't considered. The idea scared him, taking Caleb's story so far, to a place with its own struggles, but it felt right. Caleb would have wanted it. Eli's relationship with Martha and Paul deepened, slowly, like a river carving a new path. They started attending the exhibits when they could, standing quietly in the crowd, their presence a fragile bridge. One night in New York, Martha pulled Eli aside. I wore that dress, she said, her voice trembling. It was mine, from my engagement. I gave it to Amelia, hoping she'd stay the girl we wanted. I was wrong. Eli's breath caught. The dress wasn't just Caleb's, it was a symbol of Martha's own journey, her attempt to hold on to a daughter she didn't understand. That revelation shifted something in Eli. He saw Martha not just as Caleb's mother, but as a woman grappling with her own mistakes. He invited her to speak at the next exhibit, to share her story alongside his. She hesitated, but Paul nodded, his hand on hers. We owe it to him, he said. At the next show, in Boston, Martha stood before the crowd, her voice shaking as she told of losing Amelia, then Caleb, and finding a way back through Eli's art. The audience was silent, then erupted in applause, a moment of grace Eli hadn't expected. Eli's own art grew bolder. He started painting larger canvases, blending Caleb's and Amelia's faces with vibrant colors, capturing the fluidity of identity. One piece, called Both/and, showed Caleb holding the dress, his smile soft but fierce, with Amelia's shadow behind him. Critics called it revolutionary. Eli called it truth. He began mentoring young queer artists, teaching them to tell their stories through paint, music, words. It was his way of keeping Caleb's spirit alive, of turning grief into creation. But there were still nights when the weight of it all hit him. In a hotel room in Berlin, alone after a packed exhibit, Eli pulled out the note from the dress. "You're my home. Always." He traced the words, his tears falling. He missed Caleb's laugh, his touch, the way he'd made every day brighter. The exhibit was healing, but it couldn't fill the hole in his heart. He called Jamie, her voice grounding him across the ocean. "You're not alone," she said. "Caleb's with you. In every brushstroke, every story." Eli started writing again, not just letters to Caleb, but a memoir. He called it Amelia's Song, weaving together their love story, Caleb's transition, and the journey of the dress. It was hard, peeling back his own vulnerabilities, but it felt necessary. He wanted the world to know Caleb, not just as a symbol, but as a man who'd loved fiercely, who'd fought to be himself, who'd chosen Eli as his home. The memoir's first draft was finished in a small cafe in Paris, where Eli sat with a coffee and the journal, letting Caleb's words guide him. He wrote about their first date, their wedding, the quiet moments that defined them. He wrote about Amelia, about the dress, about the pain of secrets and the beauty of truth. When he typed the last sentence, "I loved him, all of him, and I always will," he felt a release, like he'd set Caleb free to live again in the pages. As the tour continued, Eli found himself changing. He was no longer just the grieving widower, the man chasing answers. He was an artist, an advocate, a storyteller. Caleb's love had shaped him, and now he was shaping others. In every city, he saw faces light up, heard stories of courage, felt the ripple of Caleb's life touching the world. It wasn't closure, it was something better. It was purpose. The memoir's publication was a milestone. But for Eli, it was just the beginning. Amelia's Song hit shelves in the spring, its cover featuring the painting of Caleb and Amelia, the dress a soft blur between them. Readers sent letters, some tear-stained, others filled with gratitude, sharing how Caleb's story had given them strength. Eli read each one, feeling Caleb's presence in every word. The book wasn't just his, it was theirs, a testament to a love that refused to fade. The tour reached South Africa, Aisha's hometown, where the exhibit took on new life. The gallery was vibrant, filled with local art and music, and Eli felt Caleb's spirit in the rhythm of the crowd. Aisha introduced him to a group of trans youth, their stories echoing Caleb's fear, resilience, hope. Eli shared the violin tape, letting Amelia's music fill the room, and watched as the kids closed their eyes, some crying, some smiling. "This is why I do this," he told Aisha later. For them. For him. Martha and Paul surprised him by flying in for the show. They'd never left the U.S. before, and their presence felt like a miracle. Martha spoke again, this time with more confidence, telling the crowd about her journey from rejection to regret to love. Paul stood beside her, silent but proud, his hand on her shoulder. Eli watched, his heart full. They were healing, too, in their own way. And it was Caleb's story that had brought them here. Eli's mentorship program grew, connecting queer artists across continents. He started a foundation in Caleb's name, funding scholarships, workshops, and safe spaces for young people to explore their identities. In Cape Town, he met a young painter named Thandi, whose vibrant portraits reminded him of his own early work. "You're like him," he told her, smiling. "Keep painting. The world needs your voice." Thandi hugged him, her eyes shining, and Eli felt Caleb's warmth in the embrace. The backlash didn't stop, but it grew quieter. In some cities, protesters were met with counter-protesters, queer youth and allies holding signs that read, "Love is love," and Amelia's song lives. Eli learned to see the hate as noise, not truth. He focused on the people who needed him, kids like Sam, artists like Thandi, parents like Martha and Paul, trying to make amends. Each exhibit, each talk, each letter was a step toward a world where Caleb could have lived openly, without fear. Eli's personal life began to shift, too. He wasn't ready to date, but he was open to connection. Aisha became a close friend, their late-night talks a lifeline. She understood his grief, his love, his need to keep Caleb's memory alive. "You're allowed to live, too," she told him one night, her voice gentle. Caleb would want that. Eli nodded, the note in his wallet a quiet reminder that love wasn't finite. He could carry Caleb and still make room for new light. Back in Ohio, Eli renovated the house he and Caleb had shared. He kept their bedroom the same, the dress still draped over the chair. But he added a studio space, filled with new paintings. One was a self-portrait, his face alongside Caleb's, their eyes meeting across time. He called it home, a nod to the note that had changed him. The house felt alive again, not with grief, but with purpose. The tour's final stop was back in Ohio, a full circle. The local gallery was packed, the crowd spilling into the street. Eli stood by the centerpiece, the dress glowing under soft lights, and told Caleb's story one last time. He spoke of Amelia's courage, Caleb's love, and the journey of a dress that had shattered him, then made him whole. Martha and Paul were there, holding hands, their faces soft with pride. Jamie and Lena stood beside him, their presence a steady anchor. As the crowd applauded, Eli felt a warmth, like Caleb's hand on his shoulder. He looked at the dress, the journal, the paintings, and saw not just loss, but life. Caleb had been afraid to share Amelia, but he'd left her story in Eli's hands, trusting him to tell it. And Eli had through art, through words, through love that refused to die. That night, Eli sat in his studio, the memoir open on his desk. He wrote one final letter to Caleb, not with ink, but in his heart. "You're still my home," he whispered, "and I'm still telling your story." The words felt like a promise, one he'd keep for the rest of his life. Years later, Eli stood in the same Ohio gallery, now a permanent home for Amelia's song. The exhibit had become a sanctuary, a place where queer youth gathered, where stories were shared, where love was celebrated. The dress was still the centerpiece, its fabric faded but its story vibrant, a beacon for those who needed it. Eli, now in his 30s, had lines around his eyes, but they were lines of laughter, of a life lived fully in Caleb's honor. The Caleb Warren Foundation was thriving, funding dozens of young artists each year. Eli traveled less now, focusing on local workshops, mentoring kids who reminded him of Amelia Bright. Bold, and searching for their place. He'd published a second book, a collection of letters from the exhibit's visitors, titled Voices of Us. It was a chorus of stories, each one proof that Caleb's life had sparked a movement. Martha and Paul were part of the foundation's board, their presence a testament to change. They'd become advocates in their own right, speaking at churches, sharing their story of loss and redemption. Martha had started a support group for parents of queer kids, a space where she could offer the understanding she'd once withheld. Paul, quieter but no less committed, built a music room in the church for young musicians, naming it after Amelia. Eli's relationship with Aisha had grown into something deeper, not a replacement for Caleb, but a new kind of love. They'd moved in together, their home a blend of art and music, with the dress displayed in a glass case, a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. Aisha's laughter filled the spaces Caleb's had once occupied, and Eli found peace in knowing he could love them both. One spring morning, Eli visited Caleb's grave, a ritual he'd kept through the years. He brought a new painting, a small one of the two of them, their hands intertwined, the dress a soft glow in the background. "We did it," he said, laying the canvas against the headstone. "Your story's out there, changing the world." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of blossoms, and Eli smiled, feeling Caleb's presence as strongly as ever. The foundation hosted an annual festival, a celebration of queer art and identity, and Eli was its heart. This year, Sam, the young man from Portland, returned as a guest speaker, now a confident trans artist with his own gallery show. He hugged Eli, his eyes bright. "You gave me a future," he said. Eli shook his head. "Caleb did. I just carried the torch." As the festival began, Eli stood on the stage, the dress behind him, the violin tape playing softly. He looked out at the crowd, kids, parents, artists, allies, and saw a world Caleb had dreamed of, one where love was louder than fear. He spoke of Amelia, of Caleb, of the dress that had shattered him and made him whole. "This is for all of us," he said, his voice clear. "For every story that deserves to be told." The crowd cheered, their voices a wave of hope. Eli stepped off the stage, Aisha's hand in his, and felt the weight of Caleb's love, not as a burden, but as a gift. The dress, the note, the music, they were pieces of a life that had changed his. And now they were changing the world. Caleb's story wasn't just a memory, it was a movement, a song that would never stop playing. Eli looked up at the sky, the stars bright above the Ohio fields, and whispered, "Thank you. For the love, for the pain, for the truth, for the dress that had broken his heart and given him a purpose." He was home, and Caleb was with him, always.